And welcome back. It's Wednesday, 4 October. We've all endured a baptism with Tropical Storm Felipe as he rolled over the islands last night. And we're going to pick up where we left off with our summary of risk management. But first, we want to stop and take a closer look at this final assignment from Module 1, the epilogue assignment. So we invited you on Monday to go home and enter this value into the DNS settings for your network configurations on a device or system at your home. And then after that, to repeat a test just to see if there were any differences that would occur. And we tried to explain how important it was, how much of an advantage it is to have your own DNS service on your home network environment. And this is true for a business environment as well, right? This assignment also included an extra credit segment. And has anyone ever seen this video before? The link.
That was my first time watching it.
Yeah, that was my first time too.
It was your first time watching it, right? What are some words that come to mind when you watch this video?
Creepy.
Creepy. Yes. Creepy. Now, I could click on this and we could watch it together, but I'm going to let the word creepy, as we approach Halloween, I'm going to let the word creepy sink in. And there's a point that when you watch that video and then you look at the topic of DNS and how DNS is critical when it comes to accessing named resources, linked resources with names on the public network, right? When you have a local DNS system, we want you to be able to describe or explain how that can be an advantage, right? And the hint that we gave is interest links and ads, advertisements that present in streaming media websites or messaging often redirect to malicious websites with uninvited guests. The very same kind of uninvited guest you see in this video. The very same scenario. You're like, how does this happen? Well, it starts with redirection in many cases, right? Clicking, interacting with links. Over 90% of exploits with network exposures occur with messaging apps and websites with links. And it's the ads that redirect that present a problem. Now, let's hit the pause button and then I'm going to come back. Okay, so on our server, I wanted to show you how the DNS. Now, if you've been in CSC243 already in our networking course, this is going to look a little familiar. So this is a standard server, Windows, Microsoft, Server 2022, and it's running DNS. So if I look at this machine, it's a virtual machine that I've hosted, one that you could host in your home environment, or one that works like a Raspberry Pi. And you add the role, and then DNS is added. This management console, right? The management console you're seeing here is very simple to use, and it provides a wealth of information, safe information to examine, okay? So what I wanted to show you is what you gain by having one of these in your environment. Now, there's another class network forensics that's also using this same DNS server for the same assignment, because I'm adding new things into the Intro to Cyber course, and I'm revising the content in the network forensics class. And so there was an opportunity to include both classes because there's a network forensics component. When you open this up, you don't see as much, right? So when you first open it up, what happens is that if you click on this, and this is the view that you see when you first open it. And what we did when we configured this server, we did two things. We configured it so that it would have the resources to resolve names on the internet, right? So we didn't set it up to provide DNS records in a primary or secondary zone because we're hosting email or our own website. So that's the other hat, or the other side of things for DNS servers, is that they provide that information to everybody else that's trying to get to your website or your email. We left that side of it. We left that side of it out. What we did instead was we turned up the feature that allows you to use this as your own personal DNS server to browse the web or to send messages with names, right? So we configured it with root hints, and then we went ahead and finished that. And then we went to the view option and we selected the advanced view. And the advanced view added an option called cache lookups. So as people are using this server, what they're referencing in their web browser and what they're engaging with their messaging apps is looked up. And what you're going to find, can everybody see the screen here? Let me see if I can maximize the screen here. Full screen. It's a little bigger now. So in the cache are the top level domains, and then as you drill down, you find the primary domains. So for example, edu. Can everybody see the edu records?
Yeah, we can say I.edu.
Okay. So if students in our class have taken the time and trouble to change some DNS settings in their home network and they start working with this, does it make sense that uvi.edu would be one of the domains that's cached in the DNS server?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would. Or mit.edu or uOregon or academia, right? And if I go into here, into the UVI folder, I can't see. I want you to see this now. You can see that they reference the My Campus portion and Blackboard, but it doesn't show anything about the client IP addresses that did this, right? Everybody can see that, yeah?
Yeah.
So there's a host record for something that UVI uses with their website, and the IP address of that host machine that's used by UVI is sitting on 228.14. But that has nothing to do with the person using the DNS, right? Sitting in their home. Now, let's look at some other top level domains. How about this one, CN? Does anyone know what a .cn domain name is all about?
No, never seen it. Could it be client network? Possibly. I think so.
Say again?
Client network?
That's a
Could
fair
it be
guess.
China?
It's China.
Oh, wow, okay.
It's China. Okay, it's China. So in a few days, since Monday, just since Monday. Let me see if I can slide this over here. Where are we? There we are.
You're saying that that change was made on Monday? This .cn?
This change made Monday. Students in your class and in the CSC443 class, some of their home network devices have been working on the internet with this machine. And at least a couple of them were clicking on links that led to China. Here's Brazil, Australia,
Oh,
Russia,
so countries or
France, right? DE is Germany. RU is Russia. SE is Sweden. The UK is Britain. Of course, US and VI, right? But let's look at some other ones, okay? Let's look at the .org domains. Oh, a lot of different .org options here. Python.org, Vici, darkreader.org, giac.org, coursera.org, right? Some really interesting things. Let's take it a little further though. There's Japan, Italy, right? IS might be, it's probably another country. So two-letter designations are usually countries. Let's look at this one right here, the .com. I want to dive into the .com.
and .com, that means commercial, right?
Say again?
That means commercial.com.
Yes, commercial organizations.
Commercial.
So these are all of the sites where students from their home network connected. Okay? And let's remember those pop-ups, the redirections I was talking about. I'm going to look for anything that would jump out and grab you, really grab your attention, right? And what I'm seeing so far is pretty innocuous stuff. Bodybuilding, bounce curl, bunny DNS, not sure what that's about. Visible, Blackboard, Cloudflare, cars.com, right? So we're getting a flavor for the kinds of browsing that's going on in the home environments. But what I want to Dropbox, right? Dropbox.com. I want to keep going because we're going to run across something here that gets really interesting in just a moment. Facebook, GoDaddy. There's a lot of websites that are hosted on GoDaddy, right? So a lot of private websites. Grammarly, of course. Now, how is this information helpful to you? If you had your own DNS system, you have connected devices, and if some of them are hijacked or they're rogue devices, they've been compromised, or they're exposed because they don't have the latest firmware, you'd start to see unusual things. Now, here's a great example. So far, I don't see a whole lot of unsavory private stuff, right? Although here's Launch Darkly, right? Lavasoft has to do with malware removal. But on the whole, I'm still seeing things that are sensible. LinkedIn, Logitech, Malwarebytes, McAfee. Let's keep going. Mookie. We need something really interesting here. Office 365, no
Would the
PM.
would
Say again?
the more would the more malicious like attacker try to find
Yeah,
like
here's a
an
good one.
innocuous way to like hide
Here's a good one.
their
Here's a really good one right here. Let's talk about this for a minute. Here it is, the first adult website we've seen out of the entire list, right? So far, that's all we've seen. Now, Passions Network, that could be a dating website, yeah? I don't know if it is or not, I'm just guessing. But here's Pornhub, right? And here's the point I'm trying to make. Is it possible that someone in the home environment had a dating app and it was tied to some content on Passions Network? Let's pretend for a second this is a dating site, all right? And then all of a sudden, based on some specific preferences or interests, oh, there's a pop-up. And in a lot of cases, it's an unwelcome pop-up. Has anyone experienced an unwelcome pop-up?
Yeah, definitely.
Sure, the stuff comes up all the time. But what I see here, I'm in the P's. I've gone from A to P in the alphabet. I haven't gone from QRS all the way to Z yet. But I haven't seen a lot of other unsavory content websites, other porn sites, right? I haven't seen other adult websites. And that tells me something about the general activity that's going on in these home networks. If someone had a dating app and there was a pop-up, you know, like, hey, don't you want to hook up? You want to hook up, right? So let's do adult friend finder or something like that, right? That's not in here. If I look, I don't think I saw adult friend finder. AD, see Alibaba. Alibaba is where China comes in, by the way, if you do anything with Alibaba. I see Adult Swim, but Adult Swim has to do with like cartoon series on the Cartoon Network, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the Adult Swim I know. That doesn't have anything to do with it. The point I'm trying to make is there's a long list of detail here, and you get a feel for what's going on with the browsing. And the fact that there's only one pop-up that has to do with adult content, as in, you know, unsavory stuff. That tells me it's likely that somebody with a dating app got a pop-up and they ignored it. And it's the pop-up that pulled this, right? So when you get a pop-up, you don't choose the pop-up, it just automatically appears. And when it does, it's using the DNS service. But what we don't see are a dozen other sites. Now let's pretend that somebody in your home environment, on your home network, were to become, I don't know, attracted to that kind of thing, right? And they responded to the pop-up and they went to that website. And then there were links to other websites and other websites and other websites. What you'd see in a very short period of time is a runaway freight train, kind of like the game Whack-A-Mole. Has anyone ever heard of the game Whack-A-Mole? Have you ever been to like a county fair or a festival where, you know, you have this big mallet and these moles pop up and you're supposed to knock them back in their holes? Does everybody know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes a pop-up occurs, and if someone is embarrassed or startled by that, they try to close the window. And if that pop-up is weaponized so that anything they touch to close that window loads 3 more windows, what starts to happen? Boom, 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 boom. You have all these different screens that start opening up. What we're seeing here is a case where a single a single redirection, a single pop-up occurred, and whoever was working their device at the time, they ignored it. Because if they had responded and it had been weaponized, the odds would be pretty good we'd see more. Still, to make another point, if they were actually interested in that, clicked on it, and then dove in and spent 90 minutes doing things, well, they really should have gotten a hotel room to do. We're all adults here, aren't we? Right? And I don't want to get into not safe for work environment topics, but the reality is there's a huge amount of content that's associated with some of these more adult themed websites, and they can be weaponized. That's the point we're trying to make. The thing that I like about this is when I go into this record, do you see anything that relates to internet service, public internet service addresses for the US Virgin Islands? Do you see any 84 so-and-sos or 208 so-and-sos? We can't even tell which internet service provider might have been in play for this particular event, right? And that's the other cool thing I want to share with you that's really important to understand. The word event. What we have here isn't an incident, it's an event. We have a single case for an unsavory, a site for unsavory content tried to fire up on someone's screen, tried to engage on some device, but nothing else happened. And how can we tell that? Because we don't have a bunch of other unsavory adult names in the mix. Now, in like fashion, let's pretend that there's a really popular video game, and it's a network video game, and it's a multiplayer first-person network game. Is everybody with me? And it just made a big splash, and everybody's in there. And then all of a sudden, you see cross links to Russia and to China and to other weird locations. You have a chance to try to gather some information on your home network, right? That can help you identify what's going on in your own personal network, right? But I love this. Here's Riot Games, yeah, and Riot DNS. So Riot Games, Riot DNS, Shopify. I really don't see a whole lot of stuff here. And the point I'm trying to make for you is when you are working network exposures in your home environment, wouldn't it be cool if you had this at your fingertips where you could look at it and then you could take that same information in combination with the results you've already learned doing this stuff. Let's see, want to get out of full screen. Exit full screen, there we go. So let's pivot. In your solution, you learned how to use NetStat. And you learned how to use Nmap. And you have GRC. And you can look up who is, right? When you look up who is, it'll provide you with public IP addresses, network addresses. You have a combination of information. If you have this information, and then you can turn around and start digging with these tools, you have the ability to assess and then to isolate, more importantly, to isolate what's going on. You may find that there's a simple app on a smart screen TV that has something to do with adult content. And I recently ran across this. I had a neighbor that wanted some tech support, and they asked me to come over there. and they had adult content on their screen, and I said, yeah, I don't really know a whole lot about this, but what's your point? And that adult content could have been part of what triggered in the DNS. The important thing for you to understand is that for your home environment, you know what's normal, and you can establish a baseline for what's normal. And then if you have guests over and all of a sudden things get weird and slow on your home network, you have information, right? Does that mean that it was your guests? No, it could have been somebody in your home that was doing things while the guests were there, and it's just a matter of coincidence. So there are natural limitations to the conclusions you can draw with the information from DNS server. But there's enough information for you to take the assessment further so that you can identify which app, which software, what device, right? Oh, we have this software going and it uses these ports. Now I search for Nmap to figure out which devices are open on those ports. Now I know which device in my home. OMG, it's my new video cameras that are wireless and they stream to the internet, and there's something that's off with those video cameras. Oh, there's firmware I have to update, right? Now, does anyone have any questions or observations or comments they'd like to share based on what we've taken the time to show you today? Nothing? So here's another website.
What was it again?
Here's another website, Tumblr. Tumblr can be very benign, very innocent, but Tumblr also has some pretty racy content, right? So depending on how Tumblr is engaged, there can be quick redirections to stuff that people had no interest in, but there it is on the screen, right? So there's another possible source for how the other website appeared, right? You could be in Tumblr just looking at images and sharing in a community for a specific topic, and then lo and behold, here's an ad and a redirect, and things go nuts. So when we come full circle, what's important to understand is that this idea of redirections, it's a serious exposure. And the more redirections that you have in your content and your media, where you click on one thing and then there are ads you didn't ask for, you didn't want. And by the way, while we're on the topic of ads, you'll never guess what happened. Did I show you this already?
Yes.
Yeah.
Listening to you through the microphone, he gave you that ad specifically.
So in two other classes on Monday, I shared this about jack posts. So jack posts was mentioned in two other 1-hour segments, the one for network forensics and in your class, right? So what did I see on the screen last night? More jack post ads. It's like, oh, if I didn't get the hint that somebody is paying attention to my interests, I sure know now that that's happening. And I'd like to understand privacy. I'd like to understand the privacy policy that Amazon has for its Fire TV, right? Now, it could be something other than Amazon Fire TV. It could be my LG Smart TV. It could be some things I'm running on my Raspberry Pi. So it could be stuff that my wife is doing with her Apple iPhone when she's using Siri, right? So this artificial intelligence in the mix is actually fueling a whole lot more of the redirects. And if you don't have simple tools to assess, okay, what's going on with my network traffic and where is it actually landing? Hello, let me say that again. what's happening with my network traffic, especially where named resources are concerned? And where are those named resources really? You may find when you go into there that a whole lot of stuff inside Russia, right? But there's a whole lot more inside Russia, inside certain domains, right? For specific providers. It's just something that I thought we'd share. So this is the kind of resource we can help you set up in your home environment. It can run on the Raspberry Pi, or it can run as a virtual machine on an older system. You could have an old laptop or an old PC running, and you could have this thing cooking along, and you could use it along with the other scans to see what's really happening in your home network. All right. Any other comments or questions before we get back to our content review? What I'd like to do now is basically finish the primary concepts for risk management. So in our session on Monday, we were talking about this worksheet that has threats, vulnerabilities, and assets all together in sort of a matrix format, right? And we did call out that there are human resources and documentation that are just as important to consider besides the digital. There are 4 primary questions you have to have. And actually, what's coming at the top of the next list is an extension of that. So it's not just 4 questions. You can use the answers to the following questions to develop weighting criteria for information assets. Now, one of the reasons this is so difficult, this is difficult for humans to do because it involves the cognitive capacity, our mental ability to do something called evaluation, okay? How many of you are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy? Anyone?
With what?
Bloom's taxonomy.
No.
Okay, so Bloom was a researcher, and he studied education and the attainment of knowledge. And human beings, as they learn and grow in their mental capacity, they develop certain skill sets, right? So raw knowledge is knowing facts and being able to do certain things. Comprehension is when that knowledge can be applied, right? So when if you know a discrete fact and then you know what it means, that's called comprehension. So knowing a thing and knowing what it means are 2 different things. And this is the higher skill, right? So you might understand that this is a Category 5 hurricane, but if you don't comprehend what that means, you're in trouble. Is everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's say you know what a Category 5 hurricane actually is and how damaging it can be. If you don't know how to take that information and apply it in context, meaning, okay, it's going to be really bad, what do we do? That's another skill set, and it's another human capability that we develop over time. As we mature and we get wiser and smarter, as we get older, we develop the ability to apply the things we know and understand. So we may know a thing, we may understand it on a deeper level. We can actually apply it. Now, here are the higher level functions. And this one is the one we're about to talk about in brief, but I want you to have some context. Analysis is the ability to take a bigger thing and break it down into its parts, okay? So when you analyze something, you're taking a whole and you're assessing and investigating the components, right? How it's made, the different elements or facets of that. A lot of times when sermons are preached, a sermon will be about a given topic, and then they'll say, here, let me break this down for you. And that's using analysis where they have a larger idea. And in order to be able to fully understand and use it, you have to be able to discriminate between the components. You have to be able to diagram or differentiate between those parts. That's analysis. Synthesis is still harder yet. When you can take the components and create something novel, something new, you devise, you compose, you compile, you combine, right? You invent. When you can invent from separate parts, you're creating a larger thing. You're moving from the smaller parts to a bigger thing. And the bigger thing is often greater than the sum of its parts, right? Like I can take a spark plug, and I can take gasoline, and I can take gears, and I can actually combine them. And now I have something that has a capability that the gears separately do not have. The gasoline separately does not have, and so on. Now, evaluation, a lot of people think, oh, evaluation, I know how to evaluate what cars are better. Yeah, sure, it's easy when somebody else provides the checklist. When someone else provides the checklist, have you ever heard of consumer reports?
Like reviews, like product reviews?
Yes, product reviews, exactly. Product reviews, consumer reports. They have criteria. And they use those checklists to evaluate products. They provide assessments of products based on the criteria. So they evaluate based on a set of objective criteria and checklists. But that's not where it ends. You can read an article in Consumer Reports and you find out that a car can carry more cargo. A car isn't as quiet. It isn't as fuel efficient, but it carries more cargo. And to you, the fact that that car in Consumer Reports is listed because it does cargo better than anything else, for you, that's the criteria that matters. So there's weight involved in the criteria. This is considered to be one of the highest level cognitive functions of any human being. And it's the one that's the most elusive and the most difficult to master, because you have to understand all of this other, and you have to determine for yourself what criteria is actually more important given your context, given your specifics, okay? So you have measures, you have criteria, but you have to interpret this. Now, why am I sharing this with you? When we look at this, what we're really talking about is a process where an organization is working through all of those dynamics, all of those components. And these questions help guide the answers. It's the organization and the specifics of that particular organization that matter most. Now, true or false, internet is cheaper, there's more variety, there's more competition, it's lower in cost, and it works more often than it doesn't here than in the United States on the mainland US. Is that true or false?
False.
Absolutely false. Absolutely false. The infrastructure that the US mainland possesses is dramatically different. So what's the point? You can take the same checklist to figure out what to do for cybersecurity in the Virgin Islands, and your conclusions could be dramatically different based on how your context works and in what manner you answer each of these questions. And when you take the time to do that, you're actually working those higher levels of cognitive function. You're working those higher mental processes, yeah? And that's difficult, but that's a sign of maturity. And it's a sign of the ability to take facts and use them. I mean, intelligence is one thing, wisdom is another, right? So you can know a lot of stuff and be very intelligent, but that doesn't mean you operate in the world in a wise or appropriate manner. You can be very smart and incredibly misguided. Everybody here understands what I'm talking about. The simple truth is every organization has to identify and perform that classification. And the process that you have to go through for risk management, the reason it's so daunting, yet so valuable if you can, is because you identify precisely what it is you actually need to protect the most. If you can work with your risk managers in the organization to identify which assets are actually more important, and let's pretend that it's the payroll clerk, and the payroll clerk has been through a recent divorce, and that payroll clerk who's been through a recent divorce subscribes to a number of dating apps. And those dating apps let's say that your organization is part of a bring your own device environment where the personal laptop of the payroll clerk is used on the job. What do you think you ought to do for the payroll clerk? Do you think you ought to allow the payroll clerk to use his or her own laptop? Or would it make sense to provide a low-cost client for professional use on the job for your payroll clerk? How many of you have heard of the series Game of Thrones? Did I tell you about Game of Thrones?
I've heard of the series, yes.
Okay. What network is that a part of, Game of Thrones?
HBO.
HBO. Did you know HBO lost an entire season and $75 million a couple of years ago because the senior VP was using their professional laptop on their home network. The hackers couldn't break into the network at HBO at the headquarters. But what they could do is infect the home network of the one person who was in charge of production for Game of Thrones. See, it's that, so that's an example of a case where when you do risk management, you're looking at what would be the most embarrassing or cause the greatest liability, right? So in simple terms, that's something that you have to take some time and thought to do. But once you do, then you can use your resources to be effective with cybersecurity. Now, let's see if we can blitz the related content for just one more slide, and then we'll wrap up on Friday. On Friday, I need you to bring your personal technology to class in person, physically. On Friday, I need you to bring your personal technology to class. If you are joining remotely by Zoom, you can use, just make sure that you're using a laptop or a PC, right? It would be good if you use something other than a smartphone on Friday, okay? Now, let's look at these other questions, right? So which information asset is the most expensive to protect? After an organization identifies and performs preliminary classification, right? The 12 categories of threat. Now, everybody remembers we were talking about those 12 categories of threat before, right?
Yeah.
All right. So that keeps coming up. 12 categories of threat. We're going to cover 12 categories of threat on Friday. We're going to identify the one or two that matters more to you, and then we're going to give you something practical to do to neutralize the threat. That's what we're doing on Friday, okay? Each threat must be examined during a threat assessment process that addresses the following questions. So these questions are framed a little differently than the other ones, right? These questions follow on the heels of the threat vulnerabilities and assessment worksheet, and there's 6 of them. But now we have another series of questions. Which of the threats exist in the organization's environment? Which are the most dangerous to the organization's information? So it's different context now. This has to do with assets. This has to do with environment and context. Which require the greatest expenditure for recovery or protection? Play what if. Worst case. What's the worst that could happen? They hack your personnel information. They steal everyone's identity in your company. And then no one has any money left in their bank accounts. Right? Or that's an extreme example of an employee-owned company. For an employee-owned company, that would be disastrous. What about a public organization or a government organization? The answers are different, right? Each information asset is evaluated for each threat it faces and for the kind of exposure that it poses for the organization, right? The goal of risk assessment is the assignment of a risk rating or score. So this is where it comes down to brass tacks. You want to have a systematic way with objective criteria to identify where the greatest exposures are. So you know where to work the security controls to greatest effect. That's it in plain English. All of these details in the summary slides really boil down to that remark. It's possible to perform risk analysis using estimates based on qualitative assessments, right? So it doesn't have to be precise. You don't have to get quotes from vendors to see how much it would cost. You can use an existing control. You don't have to add extra controls. If you can identify what the vulnerability is and you already have one, you just got to change the way you use it. Firewalls, authentication measures. Okay, passwords aren't very good. Can you use two-factor or multi-factor effectively in a way that reduces your risk? That's the bottom line. We'll stop here and we'll go ahead and pick up the trail on Friday. I hope what you saw today on the DNS server for your home environments was an eye-opener. Feel free to reconfigure your devices and systems at home and put them back the way they were before if you don't want to leave it on the DNS machine. I'm going to go into the DNS server and clear the cache so that I can see what happens this week with the network activity for students who continue to use it. So I'm going to clean the slate. Is there anyone that's still in session that would like to see how that's done? How we clear the cache?
I would like to see.
Yeah, me too.
It's actually pretty cool. And it doesn't take very long to do. So if you go into this environment, all you really have to do, see, this is all the stuff that we've collected over the last 3 days. But if I get a bunch of really messy stuff in here and I want to start with a clean slate, all I have to do is select the server name, then use my right mouse button. There's an option to clear the cache. Once I do that, I'm going to select the server again and restart the service because that's going to flush out what's in active memory. Clearing the cache clears out the data files. Restarting the service. See what I have left now? I have Azure, Microsoft, Microsoft Online, MS Identity, O365 filtering. That's all I have. I want to clear the data records, but I also want to clear the memories. So I'm going to restart the service. It's a two-step process. This clears the files in the cache. This clears what's active in memory. And now, if I wait, all I got to do, well, I'm going to see what's in there on Friday, see what's changed by Friday. And you could go home between now and Friday and, you know, browse something completely novel and interesting. Just to see if it shows up in here. Okay. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you then. And if you haven't completed the 1.x assignment or started using the methods to reassess your home network, GRC, NetStat, Nmap, you should give it another shot.